They recorded the beginning of the war as a formality, not a necessity. The coalition had done this countless times before: catalog the target, evaluate resistance, deploy overwhelming force, and wait for the inevitable surrender. Earth was filed under predictable. A divided species, inconsistent technology, fragmented command structures. The outcome had already been calculated long before the fleet entered orbit. Their first transmission was precise, structured, and absolute. A declaration of presence. A statement of terms. A window for surrender. It was the same message that had ended wars across dozens of systems without a single shot fired. Civilizations, when faced with certainty, chose survival. Earth did not respond. At first, this was not unusual. Some species required time to process fear, to consolidate authority, to determine who among them would speak for the whole. The coalition allowed for that. They always did. War, to them, was not chaos, it was procedure. Scans of the planet revealed activity, but not the kind they expected. No unified mobilization. No mass fleet deployment. No clear defensive grid. Signals spiked and vanished across continents without pattern. Military installations activated in isolation, not in coordination. Civilian networks surged with data that didn't match any known wartime protocol. It looked disorganized. They adjusted their models accordingly. The first strike was chosen with care. A major military installation, visible, fortified, and strategically important. The kind of target that, in every prior war, triggered a predictable response. The coalition fleet descended with precision, disabling orbital defenses in seconds. Ground forces moved in formation, anticipating resistance along defined lines. What they found was absence. The base had been abandoned. Not destroyed. Not defended. Simply left behind. Equipment remained, but not enough to suggest retreat under pressure. Infrastructure intact, but stripped of anything critical. The withdrawal had been deliberate, calculated, and, most confusing of all, early. There had been time to fight. There had been advantage. And yet, the humans had chosen not to use it. Coalition commanders logged it as inexperience. Perhaps fear. Perhaps a failure of leadership. Primitive species often misjudge the opening moments of invasion. They retreated when they should have held ground, surrendered positions that could have been defended. Still, something about it did not align. There was no follow-up communication. No request for terms. No attempt to negotiate or delay. The silence persisted, but it was not empty. It was active. Signals moved through the planet in fragmented bursts, encrypted and rerouted in ways that resisted standard decryption. Civilian channels remained open, but what passed through them was noise, images, messages, data streams that served no clear strategic purpose. Or perhaps a purpose they had not yet identified. The coalition advanced anyway. Control of orbit was established within minutes. Satellites disabled or repurposed. Surveillance grids deployed. From above, Earth should have looked like every other world at this stage of conquest. Structured resistance forming around key population centers, command hierarchies emerging, defenses consolidating. Instead, the pattern refused to form. Some regions fortified heavily. Others did nothing. Entire cities powered down without explanation. Military units mobilized, then vanished before engagement. Small groups appeared in unexpected locations, broadcasting signals that led nowhere. There was no front line. That, more than anything, was the first deviation that mattered. War required shape. Even the most chaotic conflicts followed boundaries, zones of control, lines of advance, areas of retreat. Without them, prediction became inefficient. Without prediction, strategy became reactive. The coalition did not operate reactively. They selected a second target, this time deeper within the planet's infrastructure. A communications hub responsible for regional coordination. Destroying it would force the humans to reveal their command structure. Every species had one. Remove the center, and the system reorganized in ways that exposed its hierarchy. The strike was executed flawlessly. The hub was eliminated. Nothing changed. No surge in coordinated signals. No rerouting that suggested centralized control. No disruption that indicated dependency. The network simply continued. Fragmented, yes. Inefficient, certainly. But functional in a way that made no sense. It was as if there had never been a center to begin with. Coalition analysts revised their assumptions again. Decentralized command. Unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species evolved to distribute authority, reducing vulnerability. It made them harder to cripple, but not harder to defeat. Without central coordination, their responses would lack precision. They would overextend, miscalculate, collapse under sustained pressure. The models still predicted a swift victory. And yet, small inconsistencies began to accumulate. Isolated units of human resistance appeared behind coalition lines without clear insertion points. Supplied drones reported interference in regions that had already been secured. Long-range scans detected movement that did not correspond to any known military pattern, too small for organized forces, too deliberate for civilians. When coalition patrols investigated, they found nothing. No units. No equipment. No trace beyond disturbances that suggested something had been there moments before. Reports were filed. Logged. Compared. No pattern emerged. The third engagement was not planned. A coalition transport convoy moving between two secured zones was attacked without warning. Not by a fleet. Not by a coordinated strike force. By something smaller. Faster. Unpredictable. The first impact disabled navigation. The second targeted communications. By the time defensive systems activated, the attackers were already gone. Damage was minimal. The implication was not. The attack had not aimed to destroy. It had aimed to disrupt. To test response times. To observe. Coalition doctrine did not account for observation from the inferior force. Observation was the privilege of superiority. It was how wars were controlled, contained, concluded. And yet, the humans were watching. Not directly. Not openly. But consistently. Every movement was met with a response that suggested awareness. Not of the whole strategy, but of individual actions. Localized. Immediate. Adaptive. It was inefficient. It was irrational. It was effective. Command dismissed the incident as an anomaly. A byproduct of early resistance. Nothing more. The scale of the invasion guaranteed eventual compliance. It always had. But in the quiet intervals between engagements, a single question began to surface in analytical logs, flagged but unresolved. If the humans were disorganized, why did every mistake they made seem intentional? The invasion continued exactly as planned. That was the problem. The second phase began with confidence intact and assumptions unchanged. The coalition adjusted for minor irregularities and advanced deeper, expecting resistance to stabilize into something recognizable. It never did. Human counterattacks did not follow proximity, logic, or priority. They did not defend what was important. They struck what was exposed, but not in ways that aligned with value. Supply routes, not command centers. Transit corridors, not fortified positions. Data relays that were already redundant. The attacks seemed inefficient, even wasteful. Until patterns were searched for and none were found. Every engagement was isolated. No follow-up. No escalation. A strike would occur, then vanish completely, leaving no chain of action to predict the next move. Coalition analysts attempted to map frequency, location, intent. The data refused to align. There was no rhythm. No repetition. No consistency. The absence of pattern became the pattern. Attempts to draw humans into structured conflict failed repeatedly. Coalition forces would establish a presence, broadcast detectable signals, leave calculated vulnerabilities, standard methods to bait an opponent into engagement. Humans did not respond. Then, without warning, they would appear somewhere else entirely. A secured logistics hub in one region went silent. Not destroyed. Not overrun. Simply, cut off. Systems failed simultaneously, but no attack signature registered. Power collapsed, communication scrambled, navigation desynced. By the time coalition units arrived, everything had been restored, except control. The infrastructure was still there. It just no longer obeyed them. Elsewhere, environmental conditions shifted without explanation. A dry zone flooded within hours, turning stable ground into impassable terrain. Urban grids blacked out at the exact moment coalition units advanced through them. Fires ignited in patterns that redirected movement, not destroyed assets. The planet itself had become part of the conflict. Humans were not just fighting with weapons. They were using systems, civilian, environmental, digital, blending them into the battlefield until no clear boundary remained. There were no safe zones, because nothing was neutral. Everything had potential use. Coalition doctrine required separation. Combatants and non-combatants. Infrastructure and targets. War and non-war. Humans ignored all of it. Signals intercepted from civilian networks contained fragments of operational data hidden inside meaningless noise. Instructions buried in entertainment feeds. Coordinates disguised as errors. The line between communication and deception collapsed entirely. Verification became impossible. Coalition units began to hesitate, not out of fear, but uncertainty. Every signal could be real or false. Every target could be a trap or irrelevant. Every quiet zone could be empty or occupied. The battlefield expanded beyond physical space. Cybernetic systems experienced interference that did not aim to destroy but to confuse. Targeting reticles misaligned by fractions. Navigation paths altered subtly. Timing disrupted just enough to create error without immediate detection. Small errors, repeated across thousands of systems, became failure. Command attempted to enforce structure. Clear zones were established. Movement restricted to controlled paths. Engagement protocols tightened. Humans adapted instantly. They stopped attacking where defenses were strongest and shifted to where attention was weakest. Not strategically valuable locations, strategically ignored ones. Minor relay points. Secondary storage units. Auxiliary systems. Individually insignificant. Collectively critical. Coalition supply chains began to fracture, not from direct assault, but from cumulative disruption. Delays compounded. Misallocations increased. Resources arrived late, or not at all, without clear cause. There was no decisive strike to respond to. Only constant interference. Internal debate emerged among command ranks. Some argued the humans were disorganized, lashing out without coordination. Others noted the precision hidden within the chaos. Not in execution, but in effect. Nothing they did was efficient. Everything they did worked. The most troubling shift was psychological, though it was not labeled as such. Coalition units reported increased operational strain despite minimal direct engagement. Not from losses, but from the impossibility of certainty. There was no moment of safety. No location that could be confirmed secure. No system that could be trusted completely. War, as the coalition understood it, relied on predictability. Not absolute control, but reliable expectation. Even an enemy's defiance followed rules that could be studied, countered, contained. Humans did not provide that. They did not defend consistently. They did not attack logically. They did not preserve advantage. They did not signal intent. They acted, and then they were gone. Coalition simulations attempted to compensate. Variables increased. Models expanded. Outcomes multiplied. Accuracy decreased. Each new engagement introduced data that contradicted previous conclusions. Strategies that should have worked failed. Tactics that had no precedent succeeded. The system began to strain under its own assumptions. A ceasefire signal was transmitted by coalition command, not as surrender, but as a controlled pause. A standard maneuver to reset engagement parameters, to observe enemy response under defined conditions. Humans acknowledged it. Then they attacked anyway. Not directly. Not openly. But systems failed during the ceasefire window. Minor disruptions. Small, precise actions that violated the agreement without triggering full retaliation. They used the pause to reposition, to observe, to prepare. Ceasefire, to them, was not a boundary. It was an opportunity. That was the moment the coalition began to understand, not fully, but enough to recognize the direction of error. Humans were not fighting within the war. They were redefining it. And the coalition had no framework to stop them. The coalition finally found what they had been searching for: structure. It appeared as concentration. Signals converging. Movement aligning. A large human force gathering around a region of strategic value. Not scattered interference. Not isolated disruption. Something cohesive. For the first time since the invasion began, the data made sense. Command reacted immediately. This was the engagement they understood. A defined objective. A measurable opponent. A battle that could be won cleanly, decisively, and according to every principle they had relied on for generations. Forces were deployed with precision. Encirclement initiated. Escape routes calculated and sealed. Long-range suppression softened outer defenses while ground units advanced in controlled formation. Every variable accounted for. Every outcome modeled. The humans responded exactly as expected. They retreated. Not in chaos, but in visible disorder. Lines broke unevenly. Units scattered. Defensive positions collapsed faster than projections suggested. Equipment was left behind, intact, usable, valuable. The withdrawal lacked discipline, lacked coordination. It looked like failure. Coalition commanders advanced with confidence. The retreat confirmed everything their models predicted. Pressure had been applied, resistance had cracked, victory was progressing along a familiar path. They pushed deeper. That was when the structure changed. The retreat slowed, not enough to stop pursuit, but enough to stretch it. Coalition units moved forward to maintain pressure, extending beyond optimal formation spacing. Supply lines adjusted to support the advance. Communication nodes shifted to maintain coverage. All within acceptable parameters. Then the first disruption hit. Not from the front. From behind. A relay point that had been secured hours earlier went dark. Not destroyed, compromised. Signals rerouted. Identification systems scrambled. For a fraction of time, coalition units could not distinguish between their own transmissions and something else. It was corrected quickly. Too quickly to matter. Except it had not been a single disruption. Multiple nodes experienced similar interference, each lasting only seconds, each resolved before escalation. Individually insignificant. Collectively, timed. Coalition units pressed forward regardless. The human retreat continued, still disorganized, still inefficient. The opening widened. Victory approached. Then the terrain shifted. Not physically, but operationally. Paths that had been clear became obstructed by sudden system failures. Navigation guidance flickered. Environmental controls adjusted unpredictably. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that halted movement entirely. Just enough to slow it. Just enough to desynchronize it. The forward units maintained pursuit. The rear units lagged. The gap widened. That was when the ambush began. It did not start with a single strike. It started everywhere. Human forces reappeared, not from a single direction, but from multiple vectors that should not have been accessible. Positions that had been scanned, cleared, and confirmed empty were suddenly occupied. Not heavily. Not overwhelmingly. Precisely. Attacks targeted coordination, not destruction. Communication arrays disabled at critical moments. Movement paths blocked just long enough to force rerouting. Supply carriers intercepted, not eliminated but delayed. The coalition formation fractured, not visibly, not immediately, but functionally. Commands issued did not reach all units at the same time. Responses arrived out of sync. Actions that depended on simultaneity failed. The humans did not press advantage in the way coalition doctrine expected. They did not collapse the formation with overwhelming force. They maintained pressure just below that threshold. Constant. Controlled. Disruptive. Every attempt to re-establish order triggered another layer of interference. When units regrouped, they were redirected. When systems recalibrated, new variables were introduced. When patterns were identified, they changed. It was not chaos. It was adaptation in real time. Coalition analysts attempted to isolate the command structure behind the human actions. There had to be coordination at some level. No system could produce this level of responsiveness without central control. They found nothing. No single point directing the flow. No hierarchy to target. Only distributed decision-making that reacted faster than centralized systems could process. Then came the most incomprehensible element. Human forces began abandoning positions that gave them advantage. High ground relinquished. Defensive choke points left open. Strategic assets destroyed before capture. Not under pressure, not as a last resort. By choice. Coalition models flagged these actions as errors. Warnings triggered. Predictions adjusted. And then those errors resulted in outcomes that benefited the humans. Abandoned positions became traps. Destroyed assets denied coalition usage. Open pathways funneled units into controlled zones where disruption intensified. What appeared wasteful was intentional. What appeared irrational was calculated. The coalition's predictive systems began to fail, not in function, but in foundation. The assumptions they relied on no longer applied. Efficiency did not lead to victory. Preservation of advantage did not guarantee control. The humans were not optimizing for immediate success. They were shaping the battlefield over time. Every loss they accepted created a condition the coalition had to respond to. Every response exposed a new variable. Every variable was observed, learned, and used. The direction of analysis reversed. For the first time, it was not the coalition modeling the enemy. It was the enemy modeling them. Simulation systems were updated continuously, fed with new data from every engagement. Scenarios expanded, variables increased, outcomes recalculated. Consistency vanished. No projection held long enough to be reliable. Strategies that worked in one instance failed in the next. Identical conditions produced different results. The system could not stabilize. A conclusion began to form, not from a single report, but from convergence across multiple analytical nodes. The humans were not breaking the rules of war by accident. They were operating on a different set of rules entirely. Rules that did not prioritize order. Rules that did not depend on predictability. Rules that used unpredictability as a weapon. The realization did not come with panic. It came with something far more dangerous. Understanding. And with it, the recognition that every step forward had been guided, not by coalition strategy, but by human design. Control did not collapse all at once. It eroded. At first, it was measured in delays. Supply shipments arriving minutes late. Reinforcements missing synchronization windows by fractions that forced recalculations. Communication packets taking longer paths, introducing slight distortions. Nothing critical on its own. Together, it became instability. Coalition command attempted correction through restriction. Movement corridors tightened. Authorization layers increased. Redundancies stacked upon redundancies to force reliability back into the system. It slowed everything. Humans adjusted immediately. They stopped targeting what was important and focused entirely on what was assumed safe. Secondary routes. Backup relays. Low-priority nodes. Systems designed to operate unnoticed. Each disruption forced reliance on another system, which was already compromised. The structure did not break from a single point of failure. It unraveled from too many minor ones occurring at once. Coalition units began to operate without full confidence in their own data. Identification systems required repeated verification. Navigation required constant correction. Orders were followed, but with hesitation measured in seconds. Seconds accumulated. Opportunities vanished. Humans did not increase pressure in response. They maintained it. Consistent. Controlled. Present everywhere but never concentrated enough to be decisively engaged. There was no decisive battle because there was no place to have one. Every attempt to establish a stable front resulted in immediate fragmentation. Units deployed to secure territory found that territory had no fixed value. Control lasted only as long as attention remained. The moment focus shifted, influence dissolved. Humans did not hold ground. They held initiative. They appeared where prediction failed. Struck where preparation was incomplete. Withdrew before response could align. Not randomly, precisely where it would create the most uncertainty. Coalition forces began to recognize a pattern they could not act on. Every action they took created a reaction they could not fully anticipate. Every correction introduced a new vulnerability. Every attempt to simplify the battlefield made it more complex. The war no longer had direction. It had condition. And that condition favored the humans. Command escalated analysis to its highest level. All data streams consolidated. Every engagement reviewed. Every deviation examined. The objective was no longer victory. It was comprehension. The conclusion formed without contradiction. There was no stable model of human warfare. Not incomplete. Non-existent. Humans did not follow a system that could be mapped. They adapted continuously, altering behavior based on immediate context rather than fixed doctrine. Their decisions did not align with efficiency, preservation, or even survival in the short term. They aligned with outcome over time. The coalition relied on predictability to create control. Humans removed predictability to remove control. Without control, superiority lost meaning. Without reliable outcomes, victory lost definition. Continuation of the conflict produced only one consistent result: degradation of coalition capability without a corresponding collapse of human resistance. There was no scenario in which this trend reversed. The recommendation was issued: disengage. Not retreat under pressure. Not regroup for counteroffensive. Full strategic withdrawal. Immediate cessation of expansion. Gradual extraction of assets under controlled conditions. The decision was accepted. Not because defeat had occurred, but because victory could not. Withdrawal began with precision. Assets reallocated. Positions abandoned in calculated sequence. Defensive measures maintained to prevent escalation during exit. Humans did not interfere. They observed. Occasionally, they applied pressure, small, controlled actions that ensured movement remained cautious, measured. Not enough to provoke renewed engagement. Enough to remind. The coalition exited orbit in stages. Fleet divisions departing along pre-calculated vectors, maintaining formation until distance removed the possibility of further contact. No pursuit followed. No final strike. No attempt to claim victory. The war ended without conclusion. The final report did not describe loss. It described limitation. A species had been encountered that did not require superiority to dominate conflict. That did not depend on structure to create effectiveness. That did not separate war from environment, or combat from adaptation. A species that turned uncertainty into strategy. The closing statement was archived across all command networks. Humans do not ignore the rules of war. They operate beyond them. And those rules, it concluded, had never been designed to protect the enemy. They had been designed to make war survivable. Remove them, and war becomes something else entirely. Something that cannot be won by those who need it to make sense.